This lesson will be the final product of everything we've introduced up to this point. You should be able to self-assess whether or not you really understand the prior lessons based on how easy this lesson is to understand. As I've mentioned before, while these concepts are fairly simple on the surface, you are most likely having to undo a lifetime of habitually using the wrong definition of certainty in your common language talking about your choices. So if you need to review the prior videos or review this one more than once, don't be alarmed because that is totally the normal progression. The concept of moral inability is going to be brought up often in conversations about free will. So it's absolutely essential that we know exactly what we mean when we say moral inability. So let's break it down. The term moral, as it's used in this term, is referencing an act of the will. So every time you hear moral, think will. That's not to be confused with something that is right or wrong. Obviously, it's closely related. An act of the will can be right or wrong in many contexts, but for our purposes, we're just talking about an act of the will. Inability, that's something that you're pretty familiar with already. That is going to introduce the concept of certainty. It's like an impossibility. Something cannot be or something is unable to be. And so that means the same thing that we've been saying the entire time, which that something cannot be otherwise. That's all that certainty means. You could, and many often do, replace inability with unable. So you often hear people say that someone is morally unable. And if someone is morally unable, that means that some act of their will cannot be otherwise, or that some act of their will has no possibility of a different outcome. Moral inability should never be confused with a different type of inability. We'll call it total or absolute inability. Total or absolute inability is when an outcome cannot be otherwise, or in other words, it's certain, regardless of the will, So the choice in the matter doesn't affect the outcome. Whereas moral inability, the outcome cannot be otherwise, it's certain, due to an act of the will. So instead of the will having nothing to do with it, the reason it's certain is because of an act of the will, due to an act of the will. And so we got to get this distinction between moral inability and absolute inability very clear in our minds before we move forward. So let's illustrate this. Here we have two men. The one on the left, well, he's got legs. He's a normal dude. The guy on the right, he does not have legs. So he's not a normal dude. Now, the man on the left, he chooses to stay still. Whereas the man on the right, the man without legs, he wants to go for a walk. The man with legs is morally unable to walk because of his choice to stay still. But the man without legs is also unable to walk, but not because of his choice, right? Because his choice is he wants to go for a walk, but because he has no legs. That's the reason he's unable to walk. And so here we have a good demonstration of the difference between moral and absolute inability. So for moral inability, the man has the ability to walk, but he wills not to. And therefore, it's logical to say that he is unable to walk. There is no possibility that he's going to move or walk because he's chosen to stay still. Whereas the man with no legs, he is also not going anywhere. He's unable to walk. Like the outcome, as I've highlighted at the bottom of both of these, the outcomes are identical, an inability to walk. But the reasons for each are different. The man with moral inability to walk has the ability to walk, but he wills not to. And therefore, as a result of his choice, he is unable to walk. He is going to stay still. The man on the right has the absolute inability to walk. He doesn't have the ability to walk, so his will is irrelevant to his inability. Therefore, he's unable to walk. Do you see how clearly these are two very different situations, even though they have the exact same outcome, the inability to walk? At the moment in this example, the outcome that both men will not move anywhere cannot be otherwise, because there is no possibility of a different outcome. Yet the reason for the certainty in the case of the man with legs is completely different from the case with the man who has no legs. One man is morally unable to walk, but the other man is absolutely unable to walk because his will doesn't matter at all to the outcome. This is the real distinguishing factor, the distinguishing characteristic of moral inability. Now, a common point of confusion is one of the same points of confusion that we have addressed in the video previous, where we introduced the definition of a choice. But I'll quickly review that here. So someone might ask, how can you say that there is no possibility of a different outcome for the man with legs? Isn't there a possibility that he could walk since he has legs? Another way you could rephrase this, it's the same exact question with different words, is how could you say that it is determined that the man will not walk? Couldn't he choose to walk? Remember, in this moment, we're supposing that this man has made the choice not to walk. That was the presumption. Now, if there's actually a possibility of the man on the left with legs, that he just walks away, then we would just be saying that he's either chosen to walk, and we'd be lying about telling you that he made the choice to stay still, or he just hasn't made a choice yet. But once we say he has made a choice, then there is no possibility of an alternate outcome. And that's just the basic definition of a choice. Does the man have the actual ability to walk? Absolutely yes. Does the man have the ability to make choices? Absolutely yes. But does he have the moral ability to walk or to choose to walk in the same moment that he's chosen to stay still? Absolutely not. So it's completely consistent with reason to say that he cannot walk or that he's absolutely certain to stay where he is. But we must distinguish that he's only morally unable to do this, not absolutely. Now, if you're still getting tripped up by this, feel free to review the videos leading up to this one and maybe review this one a few times. But don't rush this module. It is single-handedly the most important series of concepts we're going to discuss. But if you feel comfortable with the concept of choices and certainty and moral versus absolute inability, then you're in a really good place to understand the modules that follow.